Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something really fascinating and maybe a bit strange for some. Out-of-body experiences. OBEs.
Right, that feeling, that really strong sensation that your consciousness, yourself, is somehow outside your physical body.
Exactly. It pushes boundaries, doesn't it? And what's wild is how many people actually report this. Some studies say, 8%? Others go as high as 25%.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly large chunk of the population. And yet, despite that, proper scientific research into, well, what exactly happens during these experiences and what the psychological fallout is, it's still catching up, really.
For sure. So given that gap, this survey we're looking at today feels pretty important. It's a real systematic attempt to map out OBEs, figure out what might trigger them, and what happens to people afterwards psychologically.
Think of it like drawing a detailed map of this area of human experience that's often just been anecdotes or, seen as purely esoteric.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. Really dig into the findings from this survey. We want to get past just the numbers, the prevalence, and look at the why and the what next. What causes them? What changes for people?
Right. And this survey we're using as our main source was specifically designed to capture all those different facets.
So what were the main goals going in?
Well, there were basically three key aims. First, just to get some solid stats, a good descriptive baseline of OBEs in the people they surveyed. Second, to use quantitative analysis, stats, to look at factors that might influence why or how OBEs happen, building on earlier work.
Okay.
And third, to really systematically survey the psychological outcomes. What did people report changing afterwards? So kind of a three-pronged approach to get a fuller picture.
Got it. All right, let's dive into the survey itself then. How did they actually go about collecting this information? What was the methodology?
So they used an online questionnaire. Makes sense, right? Lets you reach a lot of people across different places pretty efficiently.
Yeah, standard practice now for this kind of thing.
Exactly. And the main criteria to even participate were, first, you had to be over 18, and second, you had to have actually had an experience where you felt your consciousness separate from your body. That's the core definition of an OBE, after all.
Makes sense. So how many people ended up in the final analysis?
They got 166 fully completed responses that they used for the quantitative part. Demographically, it skewed female, about 67% female, 30% male. Average age was around 49.
Okay. And did people report having these experiences often?
It varied a lot. The average was about 14 OBEs per person, but actually the most common answer, the mode, was just having had one single OBE.
Huh. Interesting. So a lot of people have just one maybe very memorable experience.
Seems like it. And another interesting bit. When they asked about the most vivid OBE, a lot of people said they were in a kind of semi-passive state. Still quiet, not moving much, but not unconscious either.
That is interesting. That semi-passive state suggests maybe a link between physical relaxation and, internal focus.
Could be. It hints that maybe reducing that outward sensory buzz helps facilitate these inward experiences.
So, okay, they gathered this info. But how did they measure the OBEs themselves? Like, how rich or complex was the experience?
Good question. They came up with something they called the OBE Feature Index. Basically, a checklist of 84 different things people have reported happening during OBEs. Floating, seeing your body, weird sounds, lights, all that stuff.
84. Wow, that's comprehensive.
Yeah, they really tried to cover the bases.
Yeah.
So for each person's most vivid OBE, they counted how many of those 84 phenomena they reported experiencing. Someone reporting floating, seeing their body, and hearing things would get a score of 3, for instance.
Okay. So a higher score on this index means a more complex, more feature-packed OBE, basically.
Exactly. It gives a quantitative way to measure the richness of the reported experience.
And with that number, they could then do statistical comparisons, right? See what factors correlated with higher scores.
Precisely. They looked at things like how the OBE started, body position, psychological history, and compared those groups based on their OBE feature index scores. Since the data wasn't normally distributed, which is common in this kind of research, they used non-parametric tests.
Like Mann-Whitney-U and Kruskal-Wallis.
Exactly those. Mann-Whitney for comparing 2 groups, Kruskal-Wallis for more than 2. They're the right tools for this kind of data, letting you draw conclusions without assuming that nice bell curve shape.
Okay, makes sense. So let's get to the results then. What factors actually seem to make a difference in how rich these OBEs were? according to their analysis? What influenced those index scores?
Well, one big area was the induction state, basically. What was going on right before the OBE happened. They grouped these into categories.
Like,
Things like sleep states, falling asleep, waking up, meditative or hypnotic states, which they called MHT, physical or emotional trauma, near-death experiences, obviously, drug or anesthesia-induced states, and then this interesting one called multi-stacked.
multi-stacked, what's that?
That's where someone reported being in more than one of those states at the same time. So maybe taking a drug and falling asleep, or meditating while recovering from an injury, perhaps. There was also a final category, antos, which wasn't super clearly defined, maybe other or less common triggers.
Okay, so these different starting points, did they relate to how intense the OBE was?
They did. The stats showed a significant difference between the groups, and the really standout finding was for that multi-stacked group.
The combined states.
Yes. People who had their OBE kickoff while in multiple induction states at once reported significantly more phenomena on that feature index, a much higher score than any single state category.
Wow, so it's like combining these altered states has a synergistic effect, making the experience richer.
That's what it suggests, yeah. Like the brain state resulting from that combination is particularly conducive to these complex experiences. Maybe taking a substance and being in that drowsy, hypnagogic state creates a unique condition.
Fascinating. It really points to the importance of the specific neurophysiological context. What about simpler things, like just body position? Lying down versus sitting up, eyes open or closed?
Yep, they looked at that too and found significant correlations there as well.
Really? What did they find?
Okay, so OBEs that happened while the person was lying down supine had significantly higher feature index scores compared to OBEs that happened while sitting or standing.
Huh. So lying down seems better for a better OBE.
Seems that way, based on this data. And similarly, OBEs that happened with eyes closed also had significantly higher scores than those with eyes open.
Okay, that sort of makes intuitive sense, maybe. Less outside information coming in, more focus inward. Lying down, eyes closed, very relaxed state.
Exactly. Reducing that external sensory input might just allow these internal experiences to become more prominent or complex. It seems these simple physical conditions do modulate the experience somehow.
Right. Now, the survey also looked into psychological factors, didn't it? Like history of anxiety or depression, or hallucinations.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting psychologically. First off, they found that the prevalence of self-reported anxiety and depression in their sample, these people who have OBEs, was actually higher than you'd typically see in the general population.
Okay, that's notable in itself.
Very. But then the analysis showed a direct link. People who reported anxiety only and people who reported having both anxiety and depression had statistically significantly higher OBE feature index scores. They reported richer experiences.
Whoa. So anxiety and depression correlated with more intense OBEs.
That's what the data suggests. And they even had one participant comment specifically saying they felt their OBEs got more frequent and intense when their anxiety and depression got worse.
That raises all sorts of questions about the relationship there. Is it causal? Does one influence the other? Or is there some underlying factor influencing both?
Exactly. It's a correlation, so we can't say why from this study alone, but it suggests a potential link between maybe heightened arousal states or altered self-perception in anxiety, depression, and the tendency towards these dissociative-like OBE phenomena.
What about the link with hallucinations? Did people with a history of chronic hallucinations also have different OBEs?
Yes, similar finding there. Participants who reported a history of chronic hallucinations also had significantly higher OBE feature index scores compared to those without that history.
So another correlation suggesting maybe some shared predisposition. Perhaps people prone to vivid internal imagery or altered sensory processing in one context are also prone to it in the OBE context.
Yeah, it could be one way to think about it, yeah. Maybe some underlying neurobiological factor contributes to both.
Okay, so it seems like certain psychological backgrounds might sort of set the stage for richer OBEs. What about intentionality? Did it matter if people tried to have an OBE versus it just happening spontaneously?
Yes, that made a difference too. The survey found that people who said they experienced their OBE intentionally they tried to induce it had significantly higher scores on the feature index.
So trying to have one correlates with the more complex one.
It seems so. And interestingly, some people who had drug-induced OBEs mentioned they felt they could actually influence the intensity by doing things like meditating or consciously letting go during the experience.
So maybe mindset or preparation plays a role in shaping the experience, even if it's triggered by something else.
Possibly. It suggests there might be some element of mental control or focused intent that can shape the phenomenology.
Okay, one more factor here. Spirituality. Did the participants' level of spirituality when the OBE happened seem to connect with the experience itself?
Yes, another significant finding. People who identified as very spiritual or quite spiritual at the time of their OBE reported significantly more higher feature index scores compared to those who said they were not spiritual at all.
Again, correlation, not causation. Right. Could be that spiritual people interpret or remember experiences differently, or maybe the experience itself boosts spirituality.
Exactly. We can't tell the direction from this data. Maybe a spiritual framework allows for a richer interpretation, or maybe the sheer nature of the OBE experience pushes people towards a more spiritual outlook. You'd need like a longitudinal study to really tease that apart.
Okay, that's a lot on the factors influencing the nature of the OBE. But what about the aftermath? The survey also looked at the psychological outcomes, right? How did these experiences actually change people?
Yes, and this is arguably one of the most impactful parts. They asked about changes in view of death, fear of death, relationship with the divine, worldview, relationships with others, view of self, even lifestyle changes.
And what was the general trend?
Overwhelmingly positive, actually. A really high percentage of participants reported positive changes across many of these areas after their most vivid OBE.
That's quite striking. So things like less fear of death, changes in worldview.
Definitely. A lot of reports of changed views on death, often specifically a reduction in fear. Many reported shifts in their relationship to, a higher power or the divine, changes in their core beliefs about reality.
How did they analyze the links between specific parts of the OBE and these outcomes?
They used chi-squared tests, basically looking for statistical associations. Did experiencing phenomenon X make outcome Y more likely? Because they were doing so many comparisons, 84 phenomena against multiple outcomes. They used a Bonferroni correction.
The correction to avoid false positives because you're running so many tests.
Exactly. It's quite strict. And there's always debate about whether it's too strict sometimes, potentially hiding real effects. So it's good to note results both before and after the correction.
Understood. So bearing that in mind, what specific OBE features seemed linked to these psychological shifts? Let's start with changes in view of death.
Okay. So, for a reported change in view of death, significant associations popped up with feeling or seeing unknown non-physical beings, feeling or seeing spiritual entities, and seeing the surroundings lit up by some kind of unusual light.
Encounters with beings and altered perceptions of light.
Yeah. And for a reduction in fear of death, the key links were feeling or seeing spiritual entities and seeing distant or surrounding lights.
So seeing spiritual entities comes up for both. That seems important. It suggests these experiences that feel like encounters with something non-physical really shift perspectives on mortality.
It certainly points that way. It challenges a purely materialistic view for the person experiencing it, you could argue.
What about changes related to the divine or spirituality?
For a change in relationship to the divine, the significant associations were, again, seeing unknown non-physical beings and spiritual entities. Also, feeling the presence of a deceased loved one or pet, experiencing 360-degree vision, and feeling a sense of expanded consciousness.
Expanded consciousness and 360 vision. Interesting sensory changes linked to spiritual shifts and worldview changes.
Linked to seeing spiritual entities again, feeling like you're at an abnormal distance from things, and that 360-degree vision again.
And changes in how people relate to others or themselves.
A change in relationship to other people was associated with that feeling of expanded consciousness. And a change in view of self was linked back to, you guessed it, feeling or seeing spiritual entities.
Wow. Okay, so feeling or seeing spiritual entities seems like a really potent feature, linked to multiple positive outcomes: view of death, fear of death, relationship to divine, worldview, view of self, and expanded consciousness also seems key for relating to others and the divine.
It really stands out on the data, doesn't it? Those particular phenomena seem strongly tied to these profound shifts.
Did they find links for everything? What about increased fear of death or lifestyle changes?
They didn't find significant associations for increase in fear of death, but hardly anyone reported that, so there wasn't much data to work with. Same for change in lifestyle. No significant links down there. Maybe lifestyle changes happen more gradually or indirectly, making them harder to capture in this kind of survey.
That makes sense. Did anything else interesting pop up from, say, open-ended answers? Any unexpected outcomes?
Yes, actually. This was quite cool. In the open-ended responses, several participants spontaneously mention significant changes in their view and relationship to nature.
Oh, how so?
They talked about feeling much more connected to the natural world, a sense of being part of it, an interdependence, a deeper appreciation, sometimes even seeing nature as sacred or divine in itself.
That's fascinating. So a connection to nature wasn't specifically asked about, but it emerged anyway.
Exactly. It suggests this might be a really important outcome that maybe hasn't been focused on enough in previous OBE research. Definitely something for future studies to look into specifically.
Absolutely. You also mentioned something earlier about DMT users, ayahuasca.
Ah, yes. The people who reported DMT-induced OBEs, especially via ayahuasca, were interesting. They tended to report very high scores on the feature index, so really rich, complex experiences. And they reported positive psychological outcomes across the board.
So intense experiences linked to positive changes in that group.
Seems so. DMT is a powerful psychedelic known for inducing really profound altered states. The survey suggests this group might be particularly useful for more in-depth, perhaps qualitative research to understand how specific elements of these intense experiences lead to such significant psychological shifts.
Right, digging deeper into that connection. Okay, so let's try and pull all this together. Based on this survey, what's the general picture of an OBE? What are the core takeaways about what these experiences are like?
Well, first, they're incredibly varied. That list of 84 phenomena tells you there's a huge range of things people report. But the absolute core seems to be that strong feeling of being out of body, disembodied, often without much concern for the physical body left behind.
And they feel real.
Very real, often described as more real than normal waking life. That's why people sometimes try to check things afterwards, veridical perception attempts. But generally, people report not having much control during the OBE. It just kind of unfolds.
And beliefs play a role.
Seems so. People tend not to report things that clash violently with their existing beliefs, and often interpret the experience through a spiritual or religious lens if they have one.
Intentional versus spontaneous.
Happens both ways, often unintentional, but some people definitely experience them intentionally, and some even believe they can trigger them whenever they want. And though this survey didn't focus cross-culturally, we know similar experiences are reported worldwide.
Okay. And the typical conditions, when and where do they tend to happen?
Most often linked to sleep states, falling asleep, waking up, but also other altered states like meditation, trauma, drugs. The common setting seems to be, again, that semi-passive state. Quiet, still, often lying down, eyes closed.
And age. When do they usually start or happen most?
First experiences often happen surprisingly. Early childhood is common, majority before age 20. The peak frequency seems to be between 10 and 40, maybe most often in the 30s. And interestingly, those most vivid OBEs are also often recalled as happening in childhood.
Huh. Childhood again. Maybe something about brain development or, I don't know, fewer rigid boundaries of self. Very intriguing. Now, before we wrap up, we should probably touch on limitations. No study is perfect, especially in this area. What are the caveats here?
Definitely. Good science acknowledges its limits. First, it's a volunteer sample. People chose to participate. They might not be typical of all OBE experiencers. Maybe they had more intense experiences or are just more interested in the topic. That's self-selection bias.
Right. And it relies on memory, looking back.
Exactly. Retrospective reports. Memory can be tricky, especially for events long ago, and how people interpret and describe subjective states varies. Plus, the sample was mostly female, which could introduce some bias, as reporting on psychological states can sometimes differ by gender.
And those correlations with lying down, eyes closed, could that be mixed up with the induction states themselves?
Yeah, that's a potential confounder, the researchers noted. If you're falling asleep, meditating, or taking certain drugs, you're often lying down with eyes closed anyway. So is it the positionings or the overall state causing the richer OBE? Hard to completely separate.
Okay, important context to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So wrapping this deep dive up, this survey paints a really detailed picture of OBEs. We've seen the huge variety of phenomena, the factors that seem to correlate with richer experiences, induction states, body position, psychological history, intent, spirituality.
And perhaps most importantly, the significant, often positive psychological changes people report afterwards, especially around death, spirituality, and their place in the world.
It really underscores how profound and, frankly, mysterious these experiences are. We're still just scratching the surface scientifically.
Absolutely. They really challenge our basic ideas about consciousness, mind, body, reality itself.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Given everything we've discussed, the richness of these experiences, their prevalence, and their deep psychological impact, what could it mean if we understood them better? If we could potentially even influence them? Could OBEs hold untapped potential for therapy, for personal growth, maybe even for fundamentally shifting our understanding of what consciousness is? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.